Hello to you all. My name is Andrew Chung. I'm Artistic Director of INNERchamber, and thanks for joining us for this edition of INNERchamber Connections. This is ahead of our concert called Love Story that we're going to perform on November 21st. And today I've got with me the musicians who will be involved in this concert event. We've got Emily Hamper. Hello, Emily.
Hello.
She'll be performing on the piano, her piano. And we've got Ben Bolt Martin on cello.
Yeah, my cello.
He'll be performing on his cello. I will be performing on my violin. And what we don't have today is our actors who will be joining us, Marian Adler, sort of in the role of Clara Schumann, and Scott Wentworth in the role of Johannes Brahms. But we don't want to give away all of our secrets, so we're keeping them at home and out of this video call. So the concert, just to introduce the premise a little bit, Ben, what's the premise of this concert?
Well, the premise of this concert is to pair some beautiful music by Clara Schumann and Johannes Brahms with some letters that they wrote to each other. And there's sort of two corners of, I guess, either an imaginary or a real love triangle that involved the two of them plus Clara's husband, Robert Schumann. And I guess the premise of this concert, or the letters that are chosen, are just to show how close they were to each other and sort of what their level of intimacy was with each other. And I guess to leave it at that. I guess there are certain mysteries around what kind of relationship they certainly had, but there are certain things that are certainly not mysteries. And one of them is how much they cared for each other, and certainly what an important part each played in each other's lives. So that's I guess that's the core premise of the concert, is that everything we sort of need to know about their relationship is there to be seen and there to be experienced in both their letters and their lives and their music.
Yeah, and we're not just the paparazzi here. We're not just looking for salacious details about their romantic whatevers. I mean, the letters are amazing. They're a historical document too, of the time. And we get a really great snapshot about how these artists, who were really, they were the superstars, they were the pop stars of the day, how they related to each other, and through snail mail, no email. And there's hundreds of letters that still exist. I think it was like 800 or 900 letters, enough to fill two big, thick volumes that Marian Adler has combed through and found the letters that work for this particular concert. I think it's a pretty neat premise. Now, so what do we know? Clara Schumann, we don't hear much of her music being performed these days. And she was, my goodness, as a performer, she was a total megastar. It started when she was pretty young, child prodigy, and the family took her on the road, right? And performing throughout Europe. Gosh, I don't want to talk too much. Emily, let's go. Like, what do we know about Clara Schumann?
Well, it's interesting what you just said, that her music isn't heard all that much. I think that in the last decade, at least, certainly more and more of her songs are being programmed on recitals of all sorts. I've heard more of her music in the last 15 years than I did before that.
Right.
And become more aware of her. Her output was not as vast as Robert Schumann or Johannes Brahms. Women weren't necessarily as encouraged to compose at the time as they were to perform. And she was indeed a prodigy. Her father was a well-known piano teacher in Leipzig. Her mother was a singer, so a musical family, like the Mendelssohns and the Mozarts. A lot of input at an early age from the parental units, and whether it was welcomed or forced, we don't really know, but there they are. And at 14, she premiered her own piano concerto under the baton of Felix Mendelssohn. So that's a pretty early start and a pretty impressive beginning. By the time she was 18, she was famous throughout Europe for her performances. So, and she continued until late in life to perform. She didn't burn out and, you know, wasn't one of these child prodigies who just, you know, stopped.
Yeah, her last concert program that survives is I think she's 71 when she performed that concert, and she died at age 76. So she, you know, lived throughout most of the 19th century. It's really extraordinary. She was born in 1819.
Yeah, that's right. So she
Married,
actually met.
right. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say she met Robert when she was still a girl living at home, when he came to stay and study with her father, who was that famous of a piano teacher that people like Robert Schumann decided to go and study with him. So that relationship began when she was very young.
But he came to study the piano and then stayed in their house for like a year.
I guess people did that then.
Yeah, I guess they did. That's commitment. That's commitment. And then, yeah, at some point, I guess they fell in love. That could happen if the guy's living in your house. And
yes, he was significantly older than she. And they didn't marry her. So of course she was an adult, she was of age. But her father, Mr. Wieck, was highly opposed to the idea of the marriage and refused for years to give his permission. And in the end, Robert had to take him to court. He had to sue him for permission to marry his daughter. And I can't even imagine what like. Anyway, they got married in 1840. And Clara's compositional output dipped a little bit after the marriage, but it picked up again after they moved to Dusseldorf, and that is where I believe she wrote the piano trio that we are performing 2 movements from.
That's great. And then things were sailing along pretty well for a number of years. So they're married, and she was what, 21 or something like that. And then Robert died very early. He died in his 50s, mid 50s.
He was 46.
Right, 46. Oh gosh.
A tragic story, really, of mental illness and hospitalization. And during his hospitalization, his wife was not allowed to go visit him. So she didn't see him again after he entered this, what they call in the sun.
Yeah, and he was there for 2 years, and he died. He died. Yeah. Now, before he died, about 2 or 3 years before that, the Schumanns met Johannes Brahms, a young man of 20 years old, something like that. And he became great friends with both of them. And you know, there are many letters that exist that he just spoke so effusively about their kindness and you know, his love for both of them.
They championed him at the time as a young up and coming composer, and that really helped his career.
Yeah, for sure. And then so after the time that he met the Schumanns, and even after Robert's death, there are these letters that started, and these letters continue for 42 years, of which there are hundreds of them. And we're using, I think, 8 or 9 for this concert that had been selected. So all of that stuff, I mean, she continued to perform, really, you know, a pop star of her day. All of the big names heard her and spoke highly of her. And I mean, there came a time when she took a teaching post.
Yes. Well, the big one was starting in 1878 in Frankfurt at Dr. Hoch's conservatorium. I don't know who Dr. Hoch was, but he liked Clara Schumann so much that he agreed to a bunch of her conditions for teaching there, including she was allowed to teach pupils at home. And she had a maximum number of hours. I think it was 1.5 hours per day that she had to teach. And she had 4 months off a year. and time off for touring. So she negotiated herself a sweet deal for that.
Yes.
And attracted students internationally who came there. So she was that well known that she could do that.
And then in all of her free time, she's taking care of 7 children.
7 kids and a pile of grandchildren. I think there might have been as many as 13 eventually. And she was very central to their lives. I mean, she ran the household completely as mother and grandmother. And yeah, busy lady.
Extraordinary, totally extraordinary. And then, so she's so world renowned. And then what's that quote that you found? Do you have that there? This is
about the piano trio?
Yeah, so this is in the leaflet of the inside cover of the piano trio.
Right. So what she said about it herself was, there are several attractive passages in the trio, and I think it is also quite successful formally. Of course, it remains a woman's work, always lacking in strength and now and then in invention. She also had written later that she didn't like it as much as Robert Schumann's piano trio.
Yeah.
She thinks hers is femininely sentimental in comparison. I don't find her piano trio particular, whatever feminine means, or sentimental either. I love it. So.
I love it. We all love it.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, I mean, it's like when you hear it compared to the Brahms that we're playing, I mean, I'm not sure how she would characterize this, but the clarity of the expression is much more direct. Like you learn a lot about, I guess you could say, counterpoint or the form, the ways that you can use form to present material in ways in her material that you don't see with almost any other composer. Like the way that she uses form to build on the material is incredibly direct and clear. Like they I mean, getting into formal stuff like that, I guess, I mean, from here we kind of go into the world of what was happening sort of politically in the musical world at the time. But I mean, just to take it back a step, like she and Robert and Johannes Brahms and a few others of their close friends like Joachim the violinist and stuff like that had this sort of team classical, or whatever you want to call it. Like yes, they were romantics in the sort of sense that they were lovers of the poets of the time, and the they all had a real sort of love of Weber, who was sort of the idealized romantic composer of the time. But in truth, their ideal was, their musical ideals were very classical. So they're very, very backward looking in a lot of ways. I mean, backward. One of the problems, and one of the things I think that a lot of musicologists are discovering now, is that we got really railroaded. This actually starts historically about this time. The German musicologists, I mean, nothing against Germans, I'm half German myself, but a lot of the German musicologists talked about the progression and the linear march of music in a way that doesn't really make much sense for how we look at music anymore. So back about this time, the composers such as Wagner and Liszt, and a few others in that, whatever, they were looking for, what is the future of music? What is progressive music? What is the all-encompassing important next step in music that leaves behind all this silly formalism? And the sort of group of people that Brahms and the Schumanns really admired, they were looking at the traditions of music and really looking to sort of reinforce those traditions and find out how those traditions would inform the music that they were writing. And so you see in a lot of Brahms music, of course, he's always talking about looking over his shoulder at the music that Beethoven used to write. You know, he's constantly comparing himself to, oh, the music of Beethoven was so amazing, and Clara as well. The way that she incorporates thematic material into the old forms, like sonata form, like she really built her musical expressions around a foundation of classical forms. Like the trios that we're doing are very clearly sonata forms. I'm just trying to think of the movements we're actually doing. Actually break out of that mold just a little bit, which is a fascinating, like actually the last movement of the trio that we're doing is very much like some of the stuff that Mozart used to do, which was to take a traditional rondo form and insert fugues into it. So to take a backward form and go even further back into the world of fugal counterpoint. So her basic forms of writing were very classical, sort of Mozart style, sort of Haydn style, but with a real sort of passionate flair, like what you would expect from romantic music. And so she was sort of sitting at the cusp of a couple of different musical styles. Like she was really sitting on the boundaries between the old style classical composers and how those informed her new romantic, passionate tendencies. And so her music is, in a lot of ways, one of the most clear examples of that, because her style of writing is so direct and her use of melody is so incredibly convinced. Like in the case of Brahms, for example, he often tends to go around melody, skip melodies in favor of something that he can use to build forms, like, which is something that Beethoven used to do all the time as well. And some people used to say it was because Beethoven didn't know how to write a melody. But whatever the reasoning is, the material that Brahms would use a lot of the time would be sort of chopped up, would be sort of bits and pieces and stuff like that. So you could actually use it really well to build these structures, which is what he thought was really important. And Clara actually shows a really neat transition of using the old forms, but still being able to make these broad, beautiful, long melodies in a way that Brahms, in a lot of ways, never figured out how to do. Like when you hear, especially when you hear the third movement of the trio that we're doing, you hear these. She just uses this beautiful tune. She uses it twice. She uses it at the beginning, at the end of this third movement. Beautiful, beautiful, long, broad, passionate melody that she was able to find a way to fit into the old form in a way that Brahms really never was. And so in a lot of ways, just to kind of bring it around to what we were talking about, she was of that group. I mean, to my mind, she was the most successful music, not successful in the whatever the, I mean, she was successful as a performer, but less successful, quote unquote, as a composer in terms of being well known, but in terms of actually achieving what it was that was sort of their goal as a unit, as a bunch of people, the Johannes and Robert and Clara and Joachim, achieving the goals that they were setting. I think in a lot of ways she was the pinnacle of that, because she found ways of using melody and using tune and using passion and having it overlie those older forms in ways that were so clear and so beautiful that you barely even understand, or you barely even notice that it's happening. That's
when the first time we played it through, I remember the Clara Schumann trio, and we're playing two movements of this trio. The first time we played it through, we were just like, light bulbs were going off, and it was delightful, and it was clear, and it was easy to bring your line out or at a particular time if you had the melody, and it's just perfect. It's perfect chamber music. It's beautiful.
So well crafted.
Yeah, so well crafted. And the Brahms is like, oftentimes with Brahms, and we did a trio last season too, it's like the scope is so big, it's almost hard to encapsulate that within a trio form, and you can tell he's got his symphonic brain on, and and just it's just so expansive.
Yeah. Yeah, you
Um,
kind of wonder if the material fits the form
exactly.
particularly, yeah, and
Mhm.
yeah, it never seems to be that case with Clara Schumann's work. It's very direct and clear and understandable, which is I think an incredible feat given what she's trying to bring together.
And Clara Schumann, so her output was not vast, her compositional output, but it's great quality stuff. Many people regard this trio as her finest piece that she composed. But what else did she compose, Emily?
She wrote, well, pieces for solo piano, a lot of which she performed on her own recital programs. I guess she was looking for something, and so she wrote it herself. So character pieces, smaller works, not the kind of monstrous sonatas that people like Brahms were writing. She wrote, well, as we mentioned earlier, her own piano concerto. She wrote quite a large number of songs, which are very successful.
Mm-hmm.
The romances for violin and piano, we are performing one of on this program.
That was dedicated to Brahms at a very early time when they met.
She wrote them shortly after they met.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Didn't she have one opus, collection of songs that her and Robert composed together?
Yes, so I don't think it was as much that they composed together, but they included songs that each of them had written in one full opus, and then there were a couple of his sort of bigger Liederkreis song cycles that she had contributed to as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I should say that Robert was very supportive of Clara's composition, and there's a quote we found from his writings that he was saddened by sort of the lost opportunity because of the wonderful ideas that he knew she had that weren't being developed, weren't being written down into new music. Just circumstantially. I mean, like we said, she was very busy. But also women just weren't particularly encouraged. But in his view, I think he thought she should have been doing more than she was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then in the piano parts that you're playing, what do you see? What is it like playing these parts? Like, do you get a sense that she had certain idiosyncrasies in her own playing, or that she was just, had massive hands, or what do you sense?
Well, we joked about her having a 6th digit on her but it's not easy, and it's a little bit awkward in terms of the technical, fingers passing under or crossing over, and the fingerings I kind of had to come up with to play what was on the page just strike me. It is very idiosyncratic. It's classically written in the way that my left hand is often accompanying my right, or they're involved in some contrapuntal dance together. Which both of those two aspects are quite different from what is found in Brahms's piano writing, which is it's also difficult, but it's far more rhapsodic feeling.
Did you say it's more difficult but more rhapsodic feeling?
No, it's also difficult, but it's difficult in a different way. It's less sort of melody in one hand, accompaniment in another, and as we know, there's far less contrapuntal writing there. It's very busy. It's very arpeggiated. There are lots of octaves and broken chords, but there are also those things in Clara's music. So the difference is in working that all together, I guess, into the composition, which addresses what Ben was saying about their different styles.
Do you think that it's a little bit, no, I don't want to say easier, but the Brahms is a little more familiar for you because you've played so much of Brahms's music?
Yes, and it doesn't make it easier. I feel like Clara's hands were probably similar in size to mine, and Brahms's were probably half again bigger.
Right.
That's the big challenge for me playing his music. It's just the sheer, and in fact, I believe in one of the letters, Clara refers to that very issue, that when he sent her new scores of music he's written, and she basically says, I can't play this. My hands aren't big enough. I feel that way sometimes.
Understood. Well, I think that's good for today. I think that gives people a little taste of what they're going to hear. And thank you very much for joining me, Emily and Ben.
Pleasure.
This has been an awesome week putting this program together.
Mhm.
And we'll be coming together in concert on November 21st with Scott Wentworth and Marianne Adler in tow. And this will be performed live from Revival House. The in-person tickets are sold out at this stage, but the live stream is still available and will be available on demand for 48 hours after the show. So looking forward to it, and thank you again.
Thanks.